You're a parasite, Sutton. Just stand there and freeze until you learn some respect. Those were the exact words my husband Weston said through the thick beveled glass of our front door. He slid the heavy brass deadbolt locked with a sharp metallic clack that seemed to echo over the howling wind. I was 32 years old, standing on our front porch in the affluent West End of Richmond, Virginia, wearing nothing but a thin, sleeveless cotton nightgown that clung to my damp skin. The January sleet was coming down in diagonal, freezing sheets, sounding like handfuls of gravel being thrown against the brick exterior of the house. I had no coat, no phone, bare feet flat on the ice-cold, salt-stained concrete. The temperature was hovering at a bitter 24 degrees, and the icy moisture was already freezing into a thin crust on my bare shoulders. He stood inside, bathed in the warm amber glow of the hallway chandelier, sipping a glass of expensive single malt bourbon. I could see the condensation on his crystal tumbler. I could see the comfortable, thick weave of his cashmere sweater. He was watching me shiver. My teeth were chattering so violently that my jaw ached, my arms wrapped tightly around my chest in a futile attempt to preserve whatever body heat I had left. He was smiling. It wasn't a fleeting smirk. It was a slow, terrifying, deeply satisfied smile that reached all the way to his dark, dead eyes. "Weston, please!" I yelled over the roaring wind, my voice cracking as a fresh gust of freezing rain whipped across my face, stinging my cheeks like tiny, icy needles. "It's freezing! Open the door!" He took a slow, deliberate sip of his bourbon. "I don't think so, Sutton," he called out, his voice muffled by the thick glass, but the cruel cadence perfectly audible. "I think a little time in the elements will do wonders for your attitude." "I'm sick," I pleaded, coughing violently, the sharp winter air burning my inflamed lungs. "I have a fever, Weston. Please, I'm begging you." "Begging is a good look for you," he sneered, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. "Maybe out there you can finally reflect on how incredibly ungrateful you are for everything I provide." "I just needed Leo's paperwork from the car," I cried, pressing my freezing, blue-tinged fingertips against the icy glass of the door. "Please, just let me in." "You're a parasite, Sutton," he repeated, his voice dropping into a low, venomous register. "Just stand there and freeze until you learn some respect." He thought that was the end of it. He thought he had broken me down so thoroughly, isolated me so completely over the past 3 years, that I would just keep taking the abuse. He thought I was nothing but a convenient punching bag, a weak, pathetic woman who would eventually crawl back, apologize for bleeding on the carpet, and thank him for the privilege of staying in his house. But exactly 4 months later, his entire meticulously crafted world collapsed in the sterile, lemon-scented air of a family court hearing room. It wasn't just the secret audio recording that destroyed him. It was what happened right after that recording echoed over the courthouse speakers, bouncing off the polished oak paneling. A security guard standing by the heavy double doors took one look at Weston's new, smugly confident girlfriend, unclipped his shoulder radio with a sudden, urgent snap, and recognized a face he'd seen staring out from a federal wanted poster. To understand how perfectly this trap snapped shut, and why I didn't shed a single tear as the heavy steel handcuffs ratcheted tightly around my husband's wrists, leaving angry red welts on his pale skin. You need to know who I really am. And more importantly, you need to know who I was protecting. My name is Sutton Caldwell. I've lived in Richmond my entire life. I know the suffocating heavy humidity that hangs over the muddy waters of the James River in August, making the air feel like a hot, wet towel pressed against your face. And I know the way the winter dampness gets into your bones, a deep, aching chill that settles in your joints and refuses to leave no matter how many blankets you pile on. I grew up in a tiny, falling-apart 2-bedroom ranch house on the south side of the city. The floorboards sagged, the pipes knocked loudly every time you turned on the hot water, and the air always smelled faintly of the diner grease that clung to my mother's work uniforms. It wasn't an easy life, but it was a fiercely loyal one. There were three of us: my mother, myself, and my younger brother Leo. Leo was born with severe cerebral palsy. He's nonverbal, uses a massive specialized motorized wheelchair that constantly scuffed the narrow hallway walls of our tiny house, and requires round-the-clock intensive care. My mother worked exhausting double shifts as a waitress at a 24-hour diner just to keep the electricity on, to pay for his physical therapy, and to afford the expensive blended nutritional supplements he needed to survive. From the time I was 8 years old, I was Leo's second mother. I learned how to measure and blend his food to the exact consistency so he wouldn't choke. I learned the precise, gentle angle to administer his anti-seizure medication beneath his tongue. Most importantly, I learned how to read the tiny, microscopic shifts in his dark brown eyes. I knew that a rapid flutter of his lashes meant the straps on his chair were too tight. I knew a slow, sustained blink meant he was content. I knew the sudden tightening of his jaw meant a muscle spasm was coming, and he was in excruciating pain. We didn't have money. We didn't have vacations to the beach. We didn't have new clothes. We had each other. And we had my grandfather Thomas. He lived 3 blocks away in an equally dilapidated house, and he would come over every Sunday, carrying a battered metal toolbox that smelled of motor oil and old iron, to fix whatever was broken in our house. He was a tall, imposing, impossibly quiet man. He didn't speak unless he had something absolutely worth saying. I remember sitting on the splintering wooden porch steps with him one suffocatingly humid July afternoon. I was 14 years old, the back of my cheap cotton t-shirt sticking to my sweaty skin, crying hysterically because a popular girl at school had loudly mocked my scuffed thrift store shoes in the middle of the cafeteria. He handed me a tall glass of iced tea. The condensation dripped onto my jeans, and the ice cubes clinked with a sharp, hollow sound. "Why do they have to be so mean, Grandpa?" I sniffled, wiping my running nose on the back of my hand, tasting the salt of my own tears. He took a slow sip of his own tea, his faded blue eyes looking out at the shimmering heat waves rising off the asphalt street. "Mean is just a disguise for weak, Sutton," he said quietly, his voice deep and resonant. "But she humiliated me in front of everyone," I argued, my voice trembling with leftover adrenaline. "She made sure the whole table was watching." He turned his head, fixing me with a startlingly intense gaze. "And what were you doing while she was talking?" "Looking at my shoes," I whispered, the shame rushing back, hot and prickling on my scalp. I couldn't look at her. He nodded slowly, pulling a checkered handkerchief from his pocket and wiping his brow. "Sutton," he said, his voice like dry gravel grinding under a heavy boot. "A snake only bites when it thinks you aren't looking at its teeth." "I don't understand," I said, tracing the wet ring the glass had left on the wooden step. "You look right at them," he instructed, his tone suddenly hard, demanding my full attention. "You look at the teeth. You never look at your own shoes. You stare into the mouth of the thing that wants to hurt you until it realizes you see exactly what it is." I didn't fully understand it then. I thought it was just old man country wisdom, a metaphor about being brave. I didn't know it was a literal survival manual. That detail? Remember it. It becomes incredibly important later. Because I learned how to look at the teeth. I grew up highly, obsessively observant. When you spend your entire childhood communicating with a brother who cannot speak a single word, you learn to read the silence. You notice micro-expressions. You notice when someone's breathing pattern shifts from calm to shallow. You notice the tiny twitch of a jaw muscle, the sudden dilation of a pupil, the subtle, nervous shifting of weight from one foot to another. You notice the things people desperately think they are hiding. That quiet, relentless observation eventually became my career. I am a real estate appraiser. It's a very unglamorous, highly technical job. I walk into houses that people are desperately trying to sell, and I look for the truth beneath the staging. A desperate seller will bake fresh, warm vanilla cookies to flood the kitchen with a comforting scent, hoping to hide the musty, unmistakable smell of black damp rot blooming in the basement. They will put up a beautiful, expensive, brightly colored painting to cover a massive structural stress crack in the drywall. They will lay down pristine, thick white rugs over warped, water-damaged hardwood floors. My job is to ignore the sweet smell of the cookies. My job is to take the painting off the wall. My job is to pull up the rug. I document reality. I take high-definition pictures of the rot. I don't get emotional about it. I don't feel bad for the seller. I just record the cold, hard facts. That one specific thing about me, that clinical, entirely detached ability to document the ugly, unvarnished truth without letting my emotions cloud my vision, it's the only reason I'm not sitting in a cinderblock jail cell right now, and it's the exact reason my husband is. When my exhausted mother finally passed away from a sudden stroke 5 years ago, she left behind a small life insurance policy. It wasn't a massive fortune, but we placed every single penny of it into a legally protected medical trust for Leo. That fund was sacred. It was for his emergency surgeries, his specialized respiratory equipment, his literal survival. I became his full legal guardian, and I moved him into a specialized high-tier assisted living facility in Richmond that smelled of clean linen and lavender, a place that could provide the intense 24-hour medical care I simply couldn't manage while working full-time. My life became a quiet, predictable routine. Wake up, go to work, appraise properties, drive to the facility to visit Leo, hold his hand, and go home to a dark, empty apartment. And then I met Weston. For the first time in my entire life, I thought I'd finally found a partner. Someone to share the heavy, crushing load I had carried since I was 8 years old. I was wrong. I was so spectacularly, dangerously wrong. We met at a crowded, extravagant charity gala for local pediatric hospitals. My appraisal firm had bought a table, and my boss had essentially forced me to attend. The ballroom was freezing, lit by massive crystal chandeliers that cast fractured rainbows across the walls. I was sitting alone in a dim corner, picking at a dry, rubbery piece of chicken with my fork, listening to the deafening clink of champagne glasses and forced laughter, when he smoothly slid into the empty chair next to me. Weston was objectively striking. He was tall, wearing a perfectly tailored navy Tom Ford suit that draped flawlessly over his broad shoulders. He had thick, dark hair swept back and a smile that seemed to instantly disarm everyone in the room. He smelled of expensive sandalwood and bergamot. He worked in high-end corporate logistics, managing international supply chains. He was charming, aggressively articulate, and fiercely attentive. "You look like you're mentally calculating the structural integrity of this ballroom," he said, his voice a rich baritone, handing me a fluted glass of bubbling champagne. I took the glass, feeling the cold crystal against my fingers. I laughed, genuinely surprised. "I'm a real estate appraiser. I actually was just looking at the load-bearing pillars." He didn't glaze over or look around the room for someone more interesting, like most men did when I mentioned my decidedly unsexy job. He leaned in closer. "Fascinating. So, if there was an earthquake right now, where is the safest place to stand?" "Under the reinforced steel archway by the kitchen doors," I answered without missing a beat. He grinned, his dark eyes sparkling with amusement. "Good to know. I'm Weston, and I'll be following you if the ground starts shaking." "Sutton," I replied, feeling a strange, unfamiliar flutter in my chest. "And I charge a premium for disaster consulting." He laughed, a warm, booming sound. He asked me questions about my day, about the housing market, about my life. But the thing that truly sold me, the thing that made me entirely drop my heavy, carefully constructed guard, was how he reacted to Leo. Most men I dated got incredibly uncomfortable, shifting in their seats and avoiding eye contact, the moment I brought up my severely disabled brother. They would nod politely, mumble something sympathetic, and slowly, inevitably back away from the relationship. Not Weston. On our third date, as we were finishing coffee, He insisted on coming with me to Leo's facility. He didn't hesitate when we walked into the sterile room. He sat right down next to Leo's massive wheelchair. He reached out, gently took Leo's twisted spastic hand in his own, and talked to him like a regular, intelligent human being. He didn't use a baby voice. He just talked to him about baseball. He had even brought him a specialized weighted sensory blanket made of soft, minky fabric. I stood in the doorway of that facility, smelling the faint odor of clinical sanitizer, watching this handsome, incredibly successful man stroke my disabled brother's hair, and I felt a dangerous, overwhelming wave of pure relief crash over me. My heart hammered against my ribs. I thought the struggle was over. I thought I was finally safe. We were married 18 months later. It was a beautiful, small ceremony in the Lewis Ginter Botanical Gardens, surrounded by blooming cherry blossoms. We bought a sprawling 4-bedroom colonial house in the West End of Richmond, complete with dark hardwood floors and a massive brick fireplace. For the first 2 years, it was a literal dream. He woke up early to make me French press coffee every morning, the rich, bitter smell filling the kitchen. He left small, handwritten sticky notes on the leather steering wheel of my car. "Have a great day, beautiful. I love you." Looking back with the cold clarity of hindsight, the warning was right there, flashing neon red. The intensity, the mirroring of my desires, the aggressive integration into my life. I chose to see it as attentive, passionate love. I should have recognized it as the meticulous grooming phase of a predator. The shift didn't happen overnight. It wasn't an explosion. It was a slow, agonizing erosion, a silent, tasteless drip of poison into the daily water supply. It started with small, easily rationalized behavioral changes. We were sitting at dinner at an upscale, dimly lit Italian place downtown. The air smelled of roasted garlic and rich tomato ragu. I was taking a sip of my Chianti when his phone buzzed loudly against the marble table. He snatched it up so fast, he knocked over his crystal water glass, sending a puddle of ice water spilling across the white linen tablecloth. When he set the phone back down, his movements jerky and tense. It was face down. "Everything okay?" I asked, grabbing my thick cloth napkin to dam up the spilled water. "Work," he said, his voice tight, refusing to look me in the eye. He stared fixedly at his plate of pasta. "Massive supply chain crisis in Denver." I nodded, squeezing the cold, wet napkin. "Denver? Weston, it's 9 o'clock at night here. That's 7 there. Who is calling you in a panic at dinner time?" His jaw tightened visibly, a hard knot of muscle popping in his cheek. "Yes, Sutton. Denver. The world doesn't operate on your little Richmond time clock." "I'm just asking a question," I said softly, taken aback by the sudden venom in his voice. "Well, stop asking," he snapped, throwing his fork down onto his plate with a sharp clatter. Some of us have actual high-stakes global responsibilities. We aren't just walking around empty houses with a plastic clipboard measuring baseboards. Drop it. It was the first time he had ever spoken to me with that specific, degrading tone of absolute contempt. I felt a cold knot form in the pit of my stomach, a heavy, sinking sensation. I told myself he was just stressed about work. I told myself it was nothing. It wasn't nothing. It was the first crack in the drywall. A week later, the simple 4-digit PIN on his phone was replaced by a complex alphanumeric passcode. His iPad, which used to sit openly on the kitchen counter, was now locked in his briefcase. A month after that, the sudden bizarre generosity started. He came home on a random rainy Tuesday evening, smelling faintly of a bar, and handed me a heavy black velvet box. No occasion, no anniversary, just handed it to me while I was chopping onions at the kitchen island. "What is this?" I asked, wiping my hands on a towel. "Saw them in the window of a jeweler downtown. Thought of you," he said smoothly, kissing my cheek. I opened the box. Inside was a pair of stunning 2-carat diamond stud earrings. They were blindingly bright under the pendant lights. I wore them to work the next day, feeling a flush of pride. I found out much later by looking at his hidden credit card statements that he had purchased two identical pairs of those earrings on the same day. I was wearing the gilt pair, the real fracture. The moment I felt the solid ground physically drop beneath my feet, leaving me in a state of suspended freefall, happened on a dreary, rain-soaked Thursday in November. I was doing laundry in the basement. The air was humid, smelling strongly of mountain rain detergent and fabric softener. The fluorescent tube light overhead buzzed with a low, irritating hum. I pulled his thick gray cashmere sweater out of the wicker hamper. As I held it up to fold it, a scent hit me like a physical slap across the face. It wasn't his usual sandalwood cologne. It was a heavy, cloying, sickeningly sweet, floral perfume. Jasmine and vanilla. It smelled cheap, loud, and entirely foreign. And caught in the rough, expensive wool near the collar, woven deeply into the fabric, was a single, exceptionally long strand of platinum blonde hair. My hair is dark, chocolate brown. It barely reaches my shoulders. I stood frozen in the middle of the laundry room, the damp concrete floor suddenly feeling like ice beneath my socks. My hands went completely cold. The rhythmic sloshing of the washing machine suddenly sounded muffled, like I was submerged under water. I held that bright blonde hair up to the buzzing fluorescent light, watching it gleam synthetically. My heart began to race, a sickening, terrifying thud against my sternum. I confronted him that night when he got home, the moment he walked through the door and took off his coat. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. My appraiser brain had taken over. I just placed the single blonde hair and the gray sweater flat on the cold granite of the kitchen island. "Whose is this?" I asked quietly, my voice eerily steady. He stopped taking off his shoes. He looked at the hair on the counter. He didn't flinch. His pupils didn't dilate. He just let out a long, exaggerated, exasperated sigh, rolled his eyes, and walked right past me to open the stainless steel refrigerator. "Sutton, really? This is what we're doing tonight?" he asked, grabbing a bottle of sparkling water. "I'm asking you a simple question, Weston. Who wears jasmine perfume and has platinum hair?" He twisted the cap off the water with a sharp crack. "I hugged Eleanor from accounting today. She was crying in the break room because her golden retriever died. You're seriously interrogating me over a stray dog hair or a coworker's hug?" "That is not dog hair, Weston, and it smells like cheap perfume." He slammed the water bottle down on the counter. "You're inventing ghosts, Sutton," he shouted, his face flushing red with manufactured indignation. "I work 80 hours a week to pay for this house, to pay for your life, and you're digging through my laundry looking for reasons to be a victim? It's pathetic." He shook his head in absolute disgust, grabbed his briefcase, and walked heavily up the wooden stairs. "You're acting crazy," he called out over his shoulder, his voice dripping with pity. "It's genuinely embarrassing to watch." That was his new pet phrase. "You're inventing ghosts. You're acting crazy." If I could somehow go back in time, walk into that kitchen, and grab my 32-year-old self by the shoulders, I'd tell her to pack a single duffel bag and run out the back door into the rain. But I stayed. I stayed because I desperately loved the illusion of the man I thought I had married, and because I was utterly terrified of being completely alone again, crushed beneath the overwhelming financial and emotional weight of Leo's care. And that's exactly how the escalation began. Phase 4. Once he knew I suspected him, the charming mask didn't just slip. He took it off, threw it in the garbage, and showed me the monster underneath. The disrespect became public, a spectator sport for him. Beat 1. We were at an incredibly stuffy formal dinner party hosted by his logistics firm's senior partner. 12 people were seated around a massive polished mahogany table, eating a delicate, creamy shrimp risotto. The room smelled of butter, garlic, and expensive wine. The senior partner, an older man named Richard, turned to me. "So, Sutton, with the interest rates climbing, what are you seeing in the housing market here in Richmond?" Richard asked politely. Before I could even open my mouth to form a syllable, Weston aggressively cut in from across the table. "Oh, Richard, please don't ask her that. Sutton doesn't really understand macroeconomics," Weston said, laughing loudly, a booming sound that forced the rest of the table to quiet down. "I was just asking for her professional opinion, Weston," Richard said, looking slightly uncomfortable. "Her professional opinion?" Weston scoffed, taking a large gulp of his red wine. "She just walks into a house, points a plastic laser at a wall, and writes down a number she found on Zillow. She's essentially a glorified tape measure. Right, honey?" The entire table went dead silent. The clinking of silverware stopped. 12 pairs of eyes snapped directly to me, watching my reaction. I felt the heat rise violently in my cheeks, a burning flush of profound humiliation. My throat closed up. "Weston, that's not fair," I managed to whisper, my voice shaking. "Oh, don't be so sensitive," he dismissed, waving his hand at me like I was a pesky fly. He grinned, completely unbothered by my public humiliation, and turned back to Richard to discuss shipping tariffs. Beat 2, the physical control. He started aggressively monitoring my daily schedule, specifically my visits to the medical facility to see Leo. "You're spending way too much time at that depressing facility," he said one Tuesday morning, physically blocking the narrow hallway with his broad shoulders as I tried to leave for work. He smelled of fresh mint toothpaste and his heavy cologne. "He's my brother, Weston," I said, trying to step around him. "The nurses called. He had a bad seizure yesterday afternoon. I need to go see him on my lunch break to make sure his vitals are stable." "And I'm your husband," he snapped, suddenly reaching out and grabbing my left wrist. Hard. It wasn't a playful grip. It wasn't a gentle restraint. It was a brutal, bone-crushing vice. His fingers dug deeply into my skin. "Weston, let go of me. You're hurting me," I gasped, my eyes widening in shock. "I have clients coming over for dinner tonight," he said, pulling me an inch closer, his breath hot against my face. "I want a full dinner on the table at exactly 6 o'clock. Don't be late. Your primary loyalty is to me and to this house, not to that vegetable." The word hit me like a physical punch to the gut. Vegetable. This was the exact same man who used to sit and hold Leo's twisted hand. I violently yanked my wrist away, the friction burning my skin, my heart hammering desperately against my ribs. He just stared at me, his eyes completely dead, cold, and empty of any human empathy. Beat 3, the financial humiliation. It happened 2 weeks later. I was at the grocery store on a Sunday afternoon. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, and the store smelled faintly of bruised produce and wet cardboard. I was standing at the checkout lane, exhausted, holding 4 heavy cases of Leo's specialized pureed nutritional supplements. They were incredibly expensive, but they were the only brand his stomach could tolerate. The teenage cashier, snapping her chewing gum, scanned the boxes. "That'll be $240, ma'am." I handed her the joint credit card Weston and I shared. She swiped it. The machine beeped a harsh, flat tone. Declined. "Card declined," she mumbled, handing it back. "That's impossible," I said, feeling a prickle of sweat on the back of my neck. "Can you run it again, please?" She sighed, swiped it again. Declined. The line of impatient people behind me started to shuffle and sigh. My face burned with embarrassment. I stepped out of the line, pulling my cart to the side, and dialed Weston's cell phone. He answered on the 4th ring. "What?" he answered, sounding annoyed. "Weston, I'm at the grocery store. The joint card just declined. Did the bank freeze it for fraud?" I heard him chuckle on the other end of the line. A low, cruel sound. "No, Sutton. I lowered the limit on your card to 0. "You what? Why?" I whispered, clutching the phone tightly, desperately trying not to cry in public. "Because I checked the statement and you're spending hundreds of dollars a week on that liquid sludge for your brother. I'm not funding your charity cases anymore." "Weston, it's his food. He needs it to survive. I'm standing at the register right now." "Then use your own meager appraiser salary to pay for it," he said coldly. "Oh, wait. You spent that on his physical therapy copays, didn't you?" Sounds like a personal problem. Please, Weston, don't do this. Just unlock the card for 10 minutes. I pleaded, tears finally spilling over my eyelashes, hot and humiliating. Learn to budget, Sutton. He laughed and hung up the phone. The line went dead. I had to walk back to the cashier, my head hung in deep shame, and tell her I couldn't afford the food. I had to watch her put Leo's supplements back in a cart to be restocked. Beat 4, the replacement. I started finding more than just blonde hair. The carelessness became aggressive. I found a crumpled, faded thermal receipt in the passenger side door of his car for a $400 dinner at L'Auberge, a wildly expensive French restaurant downtown. The date printed on the paper was for a Wednesday evening, the exact same evening he had looked me in the eye and told me he was stuck in a windowless boardroom dealing with a Denver logistics crisis. 3 days later, I found a sleek metallic tube of bright red lip gloss, Fenty Beauty, shade uncensored, wedged tightly between the leather passenger seat and the center console of his Volvo. When I finally brought it up, holding the red tube out to him in the living room, his cruelty evolved yet again. He didn't even bother to deny it anymore. He didn't invent ghosts. He weaponized my discovery. Is this your coworkers too? I asked, my voice flat, emotionally exhausted. He looked at the lip gloss, poured himself a drink, and scoffed. Maybe if you put even a fraction of effort into your appearance, I wouldn't have to give my female colleagues rides home, he sneered, looking me up and down with an expression of absolute, unvarnished disgust. Excuse me? I whispered, reeling from the blatant insult. Look at you, Sutton, he said, gesturing to my body with his whiskey glass. You wear the same tired, baggy sweaters every single day. You always smell like cheap hospital sanitizer and depression from visiting your brother. You don't wear makeup. You don't try. You're utterly exhausting to be around. Don't complain about the symptoms when you are the disease. Beat 5. The ally attack. Desperate, feeling like I was losing my mind, I thought I could turn to his mother, Eleanor. She lived in a sprawling, immaculately landscaped brick estate in the ultra-wealthy West End. I drove over there on a Sunday afternoon, my eyes red and puffy from crying, and sat on her antique silk sofa. I told her everything. Crying. I told her about the French restaurant receipt, the red lip gloss, the blonde hair, the late nights, the cruel insults. I told her, sobbing into my hands, that I thought Weston was having an affair. Eleanor didn't offer me a tissue. She didn't comfort me. She slowly poured herself a cup of steaming Earl Grey tea from a delicate silver pot, the smell of bergamot filling the cold, cavernous living room. She set the delicate porcelain teapot down with a soft clink and looked at me with a face carved out of glacial ice. Sutton, let us be perfectly clear, she said, her voice dripping with extreme aristocratic condescension, her posture rigidly straight. He's hurting me, Eleanor, I cried softly. My son is a highly successful, highly stressed, incredibly important man, she continued, completely ignoring my tears. He provides you with a beautiful, expensive home. He tolerates the massive, depressing, never-ending baggage of your severely disabled brother. Leo isn't baggage, I gasped, shocked by her cruelty. If Weston seeks a little stress relief outside the confines of his home, she said, taking a delicate sip of her tea, it is entirely because you are failing to provide a peaceful, welcoming environment for him. I strongly suggest you go home, dry your tears, put on some flattering makeup, and learn how to keep a husband satisfied. This conversation is over. I left her massive house feeling like I was physically suffocating. The air in my car felt too thick to breathe. I had no one. I had no family left except Leo. I was entirely, fundamentally isolated. Beat 6. The spatial violation. I came home early on a Wednesday afternoon from an appraisal across town because the seller had canceled. I walked into our master bathroom to wash my hands and stopped dead in my tracks. The air in the bathroom was thick, humid, and smelled overpoweringly of that exact same sickening jasmine and vanilla perfume. The glass of the shower door was still wet with condensation. The plush bath mat was damp. And sitting right there, resting casually on my expensive velvet vanity stool, next to my own hairbrush, was a heavy silver butterfly hair clip. It was not mine. He had brought her into our house, into my sanctuary, into my private bathroom, into my bed. I confronted him the second he walked in the door at 6 o'clock. I didn't wait. I walked right up to him in the foyer and threw the heavy silver clip directly at his chest. It bounced off his suit jacket and clattered onto the hardwood floor. "You brought her here?" I screamed, the last thread of my sanity finally snapping, my voice echoing off the high ceilings. "Into our home? Into our bed?" He didn't flinch. He didn't look guilty. He casually bent down, picked the silver clip off the floor, examined it for a second, slipped it into his suit pocket, and looked at me with a terrifyingly calm, blank expression. "Who was in my house, Weston?" I demanded, my hands shaking with uncontrollable rage. "It's my house, Sutton," he said quietly, his voice dangerously soft. "I pay the massive mortgage on this house. I pay the property taxes. I will bring absolutely whoever I want into it, whenever I want. It's my home, too. My name is on the deed." He stepped forward, backing me up against the wall, towering over me. "If you don't like the way I run my house," he whispered, his breath smelling of peppermint and malice, "you know exactly where the front door is. Feel free to use it." Beat 7. The cruelest moment. The lockout. Which brings us back to that freezing late January night. I had been fighting a severe, rattling respiratory infection for a week. I was running a fever of 102 degrees, my skin hot and clammy, my head pounding with a dull, rhythmic ache. At 8 o'clock at night, the nursing facility called my cell phone in a panic. They needed an emergency physical authorization signature for a sudden, drastic change in Leo's anti-seizure medication, and they needed to see his original notarized medical proxy document. The document was in the glove compartment of my car, parked in the driveway. I threw on the thin cotton nightgown, feeling dizzy and disoriented from the high fever, and ran out the front door to my car. The sleet was coming down in freezing horizontal sheets, cutting into my bare skin like tiny, icy knives. I unlocked the car, grabbed the heavy paper document from the glove box, and slammed the door shut. When I turned back to the house, shivering violently, the warm amber porch light suddenly clicked off, plunging me into freezing darkness. I ran to the heavy wooden door, my bare feet slipping on the icy concrete, and grabbed the brass handle. It wouldn't turn. Locked. I knocked on the thick glass, at first gently, then pounding with the side of my fist. "Weston, open the door." He appeared in the hallway holding his glass of bourbon, watching me shiver. "Weston, please," I mouthed through the glass, my teeth chattering uncontrollably, tears of physical pain freezing on my cheeks. "I'm freezing. I'm sick." "You're a parasite, Sutton," he said, sliding the deadbolt locked. "Just stand there and freeze until you learn some respect." He turned his back on me and walked slowly up the stairs. I stood on that freezing porch for 45 agonizing minutes. My wet feet went completely numb, losing all sensation. My lips turned a pale, sickly blue. I huddled tightly in the dark corner by the brick siding, pulling my knees to my chest, desperately trying to block the biting wind. The cold sank deeply into my bones, a painful, throbbing ache. Eventually, knowing I was going to get hypothermia and die on that porch, I limped around to the back of the house. I found a heavy, jagged garden rock. I smashed it through a small ground-level basement window. The glass shattered with a deafening crash. I had to crawl through the jagged, broken frame, dragging my body over the glass. A sharp shard sliced deeply into my knee, cutting all the way to the bone. Blood poured down my leg, hot and sticky against my freezing skin. I sat alone on the filthy, freezing concrete floor of the dark basement, bleeding, shivering, dripping wet mud, listening to the muffled sound of his heavy footsteps, casually walking around on the warm floorboards directly above my head. That was beat 8. The ultimate breaking point. It wasn't a loud, dramatic explosion. I didn't scream at the ceiling. I didn't cry anymore. My tears had frozen solid. I sat there in the pitch-black darkness, gripping a dirty, oily shop rag tightly against my bleeding knee, feeling the warm blood soak through the fabric, and I felt a quiet, distinct, mechanical click deep inside my brain. The terrified, abused victim died on that cold concrete floor, bleeding out in the dark. The cold, calculating strategist was born. A snake only bites when it thinks you aren't looking at its teeth. My grandfather's voice echoed perfectly in the silence of the basement. I stared into the darkness. I saw the teeth. I saw exactly what Weston was. I wiped the smeared blood off my leg. I wasn't just going to leave him. I was going to pull every single one of his teeth out of his head. The next morning, Weston walked down the stairs, adjusted his expensive silk tie, picked up his leather briefcase, and left for work. He stepped right over the shattered glass in the basement hallway without saying a single word to me, completely ignoring the bloody rag sitting on the counter. He acted like absolutely nothing had happened. At noon, my phone buzzed with a text message from him. "Pick up my dry cleaning today. Make sure they used heavy starch on the collars." I didn't reply. I bandaged my knee, put on a thick coat, and went directly to the bank downtown. If I was going to systematically dismantle him, I needed to know exactly what I was walking away with. I walked into the sterile, mint-scented lobby of the bank, sat down in the branch manager's glass-walled office, and calmly asked for a full, comprehensive printout of all our joint accounts. The manager, a nervous-looking man in a cheap suit, printed the pages and handed the thick stack of paper across the mahogany desk. I scanned the lines of numbers, my appraiser eyes looking for anomalies, searching for the rot. My eyes locked onto the third line down on page 2. Transfer out, $47,300. My heart stopped dead in my chest. All the air left my lungs. I couldn't breathe. That massive transfer wasn't from our joint household checking account. It wasn't from our shared savings. It was from Leo's protected medical trust. The sacred account I had foolishly made Weston a legal cosigner on 2 years ago, just in case I was ever incapacitated and the nursing facility needed emergency payment. "Excuse me," I said to the manager, my voice eerily, unnaturally calm despite the sudden, deafening roaring in my ears, a sound like standing next to a jet engine. "Where exactly did this specific transfer go?" The manager typed furiously on his keyboard, squinting at his monitor. "Let me check that routing number for you, Mrs. Caldwell." "Ah, yes, it was a wire transfer initiated by your husband 3 days ago. It was sent to an out-of-state LLC, a business called Apex Consulting, registered in Nevada." "Nevada?" I whispered, my hands gripping the edge of the desk so hard my knuckles turned white. "We don't have any business in Nevada. The wire has already fully cleared, ma'am. The funds are gone." $47,300. Every single desperate dollar my exhausted mother had scraped together over a lifetime of double shifts. The money meant for my crippled brother's survival. Stolen. Gone. I stood up, thanked the manager, walked out of that bank, and sat in the driver's seat of my car in the parking garage. I didn't cry. I didn't panic. I didn't scream and hit the steering wheel. I just closed my eyes and let the cold, calculated, absolute fury settle permanently into my bones. He didn't just cheat on me with a cheap mistress. He didn't just lock me out in the sleet to freeze to death. He stole my helpless, disabled brother's survival fund. Phase 5 had officially begun. The hidden preparation. What Weston didn't know was that while he arrogantly thought I was broken, assuming I was crying myself to sleep in the guest bedroom every single night, I was actually quietly, methodically dismantling his entire life, piece by piece, wire by wire. First, I needed hard evidence, real, undeniable, legally admissible evidence. Not just a gut feeling, not just a stray blonde hair, not just a bank statement he could claim was a bad investment. I drove to a specialized high-end electronics surveillance store one town over. I paid cash. I bought 3 military-grade voice-activated micro recorders. They were incredibly small, roughly the size of a thumb drive, encased in black plastic. I spent 3 terrifying, adrenaline-fueled hours that night, while Weston was supposedly at a late dinner meeting installing them. I crawled under the driver's seat of his Volvo, smelling the stale leather and floor mats, and secured the first recorder directly to the metal seat frame with heavy-duty industrial Velcro. I unscrewed the metal grating of the heating vent in his home office, placed the second recorder deep inside the ductwork, and screwed the grate back in. And I carefully unscrewed the felt bottom of the heavy brass lamp on his side of the bed, placed the third recorder inside the hollow base, and glued the felt back down. For 2 agonizing weeks, I played the role of the dutiful, terrified, submissive wife. I cooked his dinners perfectly. I kept my eyes down when he spoke. I let him insult my clothes. I let him call me crazy. I let him think he had won. And every 3 days, while he was taking his long, hot morning showers, I frantically retrieved the hidden recorders, plugged them into my laptop, downloaded the encrypted audio files to a secure, password-protected flash drive, replaced the tiny lithium batteries, and put the recorders back in their hiding spots before the water stopped running. At first, listening to the audio was agonizingly boring. It was just endless, mundane phone calls about shipping containers, logistical delays, and golf games. And then, on a rainy Tuesday afternoon, sitting alone at my kitchen island with my headphones pressed tightly against my ears, I hit the absolute motherlode. I plugged the flash drive in, clicked on the audio file labeled Volvo_2s, and pressed play. "Hey, baby." It was a woman's voice echoing inside the car cabin. High-pitched, sickly sweet, dripping with artificial affection. The mistress. "Hey, beautiful," Weston's voice replied, deep and relaxed, the wet, distinct sound of a kiss over the microphone. "Are we still on for the long weekend at the cabin in Aspen?" she asked. "Of course we are. I just have to deal with the anchor first," he said. The anchor. He meant me. I felt a cold spike of hatred pierce my chest. "Did you finally get the money moved?" she asked, her voice suddenly dropping lower, taking on a conspiratorial, anxious tone. "Yeah, 47 grand, Weston laughed arrogantly. "The wire cleared to the Nevada Shell account yesterday morning. The stupid bitch didn't even notice. It was just sitting there rotting in a medical trust for her pathetic vegetable brother. Honestly, I'm doing society a favor taking it. I'll use it to cover the massive down payment on the new condo for us." I paused the recording. My hands were shaking so violently I could barely grip the computer mouse. I had to take 3 deep, shuddering breaths to stop myself from vomiting into the sink. He actually took my disabled brother's blood money to buy a luxury love nest for his mistress. I clicked play again. But it was the very next part of the recording that completely, permanently sealed his fate. "Are you absolutely sure nobody is looking for you under this name?" Weston asked, his tone suddenly shifting from arrogant to deadly serious. "I can't have cops showing up at my office, Chloe." "Relax, Wes," she laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "Chloe Davis doesn't exist anymore. I bought the ID from a guy in Vegas. The Arizona cops are looking for Marissa Vance. As long as I stay out of the digital system here in Virginia, I'm a complete ghost. Just get the divorce papers signed, get the crazy wife out of the house, and we're golden." I paused the audio again. I sat back in my chair, staring blankly at the white ceiling, the silence of the kitchen deafening around me. The Arizona cops are looking for Marissa Vance. I am an appraiser. I do incredibly deep, exhaustive background checks on property titles, hidden liens, and obscure public records for a living. I know how to navigate complex, restricted public databases better than most licensed private investigators. I opened a secure, encrypted browser on my laptop. I accessed the Arizona Department of Public Safety's active, statewide warrant database. I typed the name Marissa Vance into the search bar and hit enter. The page loaded instantly. A high-resolution mugshot appeared on my screen. It was a woman with heavily dyed, damaged platinum blonde hair, dark roots showing at the scalp, and a sneering, defiant smile. The laundry room hair, the exact same woman. The list of felony charges printed in bold black letters beneath her face took my breath away. Active warrant, felony embezzlement, felony wire fraud, grand theft, fleeing federal prosecution. She wasn't just a mistress. She had systematically stolen nearly $200,000 from a vulnerable elderly care facility in Phoenix, where she had worked as a financial administrator, and skipped town before the indictment came down. She was a highly sought-after federal fugitive. And Weston knew. He knew exactly who she was. He was actively, intentionally harboring a federal fugitive. He was funding her illegal hiding with my brother's stolen trust money. I didn't hesitate. I connected my laptop to the printer. I printed the Arizona warrant. I printed the high-resolution mugshot. I printed the bank statements highlighting the stolen $47,300. I stayed up until 3 a.m., my eyes burning, transcribing every single second of that damning audio recording into a neatly typed, perfectly formatted legal document. I put every single piece of paper into a thick, heavy manila folder and locked it inside my appraisal briefcase. I didn't confront him the next morning. I didn't scream. I didn't say a single word about it. I just smiled, handed him his coffee, and waited. Beat 8, the institutional threat. Weston violently initiated the divorce 2 weeks later. He walked into the kitchen on a bright Saturday morning, slapped a massive thick stack of stapled legal papers onto the granite counter with a loud smack, and poured himself a cup of coffee. "Sign them," he demanded, pointing at the documents. I looked down at the intimidating stack of legalese. "What exactly is this, Weston?" "It's a divorce petition and a formal 30-day eviction notice. I'm keeping the house. I'm keeping both cars. You get your clothes, your cheap shoes, and you get out of my sight by next Friday." "Weston, my name is on the deed to this house," I said, keeping my voice perfectly level. "You can't just throw me out on the street." He slammed his coffee mug down, spilling hot liquid over the counter. He leaned over the island, his face inches from mine, his dark eyes full of pure, unadulterated malice. "Watch me, Sutton. I have the most expensive, vicious lawyers in Richmond on retainer. I will drag you through the courts until you are completely bankrupt." "You have no grounds to take everything," I countered. "I'll make the grounds," he whispered viciously. "I will have a judge declare you mentally unstable. I'll tell them you broke a window in a psychotic rage and violently hurt yourself. I have high-definition pictures of your blood smeared all over the basement floor. I'll testify that you're a physical danger to yourself and your brother. I'll make sure the state strips your guardianship, takes custody of Leo, and puts him in a miserable, underfunded public ward. Just sign the damn papers, walk away quietly, and I might generously let you keep your pathetic little car." He was using my helpless brother as a weapon. He was genuinely threatening to destroy Leo's entire life, to put him in a state-run facility where he would likely die of neglect, just to secure his own financial convenience and clear the way for his fugitive mistress. I looked down at the papers. I picked up a black pen, feeling the smooth plastic in my fingers. "I'm not signing this without a formal hearing in front of a judge," I said softly, dropping the pen onto the counter. He laughed, a loud, booming, triumphant laugh that echoed in the kitchen. "A hearing? You really want to go to court and embarrass yourself on the public record? Fine. I'll see you in family court, Sutton. Dress warm. It's incredibly cold out there for a stray dog." He had absolutely no idea what was coming for him. Phase 6, the reversal. It was a dreary Tuesday morning, exactly 14 days later. Richmond Family Court, Room 4. B. The air in the courthouse smelled strongly of lemon floor wax, old paper, and nervous sweat. The wooden benches were hard and uncomfortable. I sat quietly at the petitioner's table with my attorney, a sharp, incredibly competent man named Mr. Hayes. I was wearing a simple, tailored gray suit. My hair was pulled back. My hands were folded neatly on the wooden table. My heart rate was a steady, calm 60 beats per minute. I was perfectly, terrifyingly calm. Weston walked through the heavy double doors like he owned the entire building. He was wearing a custom midnight navy Brioni suit, his thick hair perfectly styled, his expensive watch gleaming under the fluorescent lights. He was smirking, a look of absolute, arrogant victory plastered across his handsome face, and right behind him walked two women. The first was Eleanor, his mother. She wore an immaculate, pale pink Chanel suit, clutching a designer handbag, and she looked over at me as if I were a piece of rotting garbage she had unfortunately scraped off her expensive shoe. The second woman was Chloe, Marissa Vance, the federal fugitive. She was hanging tightly onto Weston's arm, wearing a tight, incredibly expensive designer dress, undoubtedly bought with my brother's stolen trust money. Her blonde hair was curled perfectly. Weston actually had the absolute staggering audacity to bring his mistress directly to our divorce hearing, sitting her in the front row of the gallery purely to intimidate me. He leaned over to her, whispered something in her ear, and they both laughed out loud, looking directly at me with mocking pity. Peak smugness, the highest, most arrogant altitude before the catastrophic fall. The judge, a stern, no-nonsense woman with graying hair named Judge Harrison, took the high bench. She adjusted her reading glasses, banged her wooden gavel once, and looked down at the printed docket. Caldwell versus Caldwell. Let's proceed. Mr. Davis, I understand your client, Mr. Caldwell, is requesting full, exclusive possession of the marital assets, the primary residence, and a restraining order against his wife due to alleged severe mental instability. Weston's expensive lawyer, Mr. Davis, stood up smoothly, buttoning his suit jacket. Yes, Your Honor, Mrs. Stood up. Caldwell has exhibited highly erratic, violent, and self-harming behavior, including smashing a window and bleeding throughout the marital home. My client is simply trying to protect his physical safety and his property. Judge Harrison frowned, turning her gaze to my lawyer. Mr. Hayes, your response to these severe allegations? Mr. Hayes stood up slowly. He didn't have a massive, intimidating stack of papers like Mr. Davis. He just had a small, sleek laptop, connected via an HDMI cable to the courtroom's large audiovisual presentation system. Your Honor, Mr. Hayes said, his voice deep and echoing in the quiet room. We reject the petition entirely. The claims of mental instability are entirely fabricated. Furthermore, we are introducing immediate evidence today that Mr. Caldwell has not only committed repeated adultery, but has engaged in felony financial theft from a protected medical trust belonging to a disabled adult and is currently knowingly harboring a wanted federal fugitive. The courtroom went dead, terrifyingly silent. You could have heard a pin drop on the carpet. Weston's arrogant smirk vanished instantly, wiped from his face as if he had been physically struck. He shot up from his heavy wooden chair, his face flushing dark red. Objection! This is absolutely absurd. She's crazy, Your Honor. She's making this up. Sit down and be quiet, Mr. Caldwell, Judge Harrison barked, her voice cracking like a whip. She glared at him until he slowly sank back into his chair. She turned back to my table. Mr. Hayes, those are incredibly severe criminal allegations. You are in family court. You better have immediate, irrefutable proof to back that up right now. We do, Your Honor, Mr. Hayes said calmly, tapping his laptop touchpad. Exhibit A. A voice-activated audio recording captured legally within a jointly owned marital vehicle. I'd like to play it for the court. Judge Harrison nodded curtly. Proceed, Mr. Hayes pressed a single button on his laptop keyboard. The audio didn't just play softly from the computer speakers. It blasted through the courthouse's heavy, wall-mounted PA system. 4 massive speakers amplified Weston's arrogant voice in crystal clear, inescapable high-definition audio. Did you finally get the money moved? The mistress's distinctive, high-pitched voice echoed violently off the polished wood paneling. Yeah, 47 grand. The wire cleared to the Nevada Shell account yesterday. The stupid bitch didn't even notice. It was sitting in a trust for her vegetable brother. Honestly, I'm doing society a favor taking it. Eleanor gasped loudly in the gallery behind me. It was a sharp sucking sound of pure horror. She dropped her heavy designer purse. The metal clasp hit the hardwood floor with a loud crack. I didn't look at Eleanor. I watched Weston. I watched the blood rapidly drain out of his face in slow motion, his skin turning a sickly pale gray. His jaw went completely slack, his mouth hanging open. His dark eyes darted frantically around the room like a trapped animal. His hands, resting flat on the wooden defense table, began to shake violently, visibly vibrating against the wood. But the tape wasn't done playing. "Are you absolutely sure nobody is looking for you under this name?" Weston's amplified voice boomed from the speakers. "Relax, Wes. Chloe Davis doesn't exist anymore. The Arizona cops are looking for Marissa Vance. As long as I stay out of the system here in Virginia, I'm a ghost." Mr. Hayes pressed the spacebar, pausing the audio. The resulting silence in the massive room was deafening. It was thick, heavy, and absolute. It was the suffocating silence of total, unmitigated destruction. Weston looked like he was going to physically vomit. He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing, and slowly, rigidly turned his head to look over his shoulder at Chloe. She was frozen in her seat in the front row, her face completely white, her eyes wide with absolute, paralyzing terror. She smelled suddenly of sour, nervous sweat, overpowering her expensive jasmine perfume. "Your Honor," Mr. Hayes said calmly, breaking the silence as he handed the thick manila file to the bailiff to pass up to the high bench. "Included in this sworn file are the official bank routing numbers proving the direct theft of exactly $47,300 from Leo Caldwell's Protected Medical Trust to an LLC owned by Mr. Caldwell. Also included is the active verified federal warrant out of the state of Arizona for one Marissa Vance for felony embezzlement." Judge Harrison put on her reading glasses and looked down at the paperwork. She read the first page. She read the second. Her face slowly hardened into a tight, terrifying mask of pure, righteous fury. She looked up slowly, peering over the rim of her glasses, and locked eyes directly with Weston. But before she could even speak a word of condemnation, the final mechanism of the trap finalized. Standing rigidly by the heavy double doors at the back of the courtroom was the bailiff, an older man named Officer Miller. He had been listening intently to the audio playing over the speakers. He looked up at the printed Arizona warrant photo Mr. Hayes had simultaneously projected onto the large evidence screen on the wall. Then, Officer Miller looked directly at the blonde woman sitting in the front row of the gallery, wearing the expensive dress. Officer Miller didn't say a single word. He didn't yell. He just slowly reached up, unclipped his shoulder radio, pressed the transmit button, and spoke quietly but firmly into the microphone. "Dispatch, we have a code 4 in courtroom 4B, requesting immediate, heavy backup for the apprehension of an out-of-state federal fugitive." Marissa Vance panicked. Pure animalistic flight response took over. She jumped up out of her wooden seat, her high heels slipping on the floor, and bolted frantically for the back door. She didn't make it 3 feet. Officer Miller lunged forward and intercepted her, tackling her hard right into the heavy wooden pews. She screamed, a shrill, piercing sound, thrashing wildly, kicking her legs. "Weston, do something! Wes, help me!" Weston just stood there at the defense table, completely paralyzed, his expensive suit suddenly looking too big for him, his mouth opening and closing silently, like a suffocating fish pulled onto a dock. Eleanor, his horrible, aristocratic, untouchable mother, stood up slowly, her face as pale as a sheet, trembling uncontrollably. "Weston," she whispered into the chaotic room, her voice shaking with horror and absolute social ruin. "What have you done?" 3 more heavy-set sheriff's deputies burst through the back doors, their heavy boots pounding on the floor. They hauled Marissa up roughly by her arms, slammed her hands forcefully behind her back, and slapped the heavy cold steel handcuffs onto her wrists with a loud, ratcheting click. Judge Harrison slammed her wooden gavel down onto the sounding block with the deafening force of a gunshot. Bang! "Mr. Caldwell!" she roared, her voice echoing with absolute authority. "You are ordered to surrender your passport to the clerk immediately. Bailiff, detain Mr. Caldwell in the holding cells downstairs, pending an emergency hearing on felony theft and being an accessory to harbor a known fugitive. And Mr. Hayes?" "Yes, Your Honor," my lawyer replied calmly. "Prepare the orders immediately. Mrs. Caldwell is granted full exclusive possession of the marital home, an immediate freezing of every single one of Mr. Caldwell's financial accounts, and a full, permanent protective order." Two large deputies walked up behind Weston and grabbed him firmly by his tailored arms. "Sutton!" he yelled, finally finding his voice as they began to physically drag him backward away from the table. His charming, untouchable facade was completely, utterly shattered into a million pieces. He looked pathetic. He looked incredibly small. He looked weak. "Sutton, please! Tell them it's a mistake. I'll give the money back. I swear I'll give it all back. Please, Sutton." I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I didn't laugh. I calmly stood up from my chair, smoothed out the wrinkles in the skirt of my gray suit, picked up my purse, and looked him dead in his terrified, weeping eyes. "You should have bought a thicker coat, Weston," I said quietly, my voice carrying perfectly across the room. "It's cold out there for a stray dog." I turned my back on him, ignoring his desperate, sobbing screams, and walked slowly with perfect posture out of the courtroom. The true power is never in the explosion. The power is in the restraint. Phase 7. The aftermath. The catastrophic cascade of Weston's ruin was absolute, and it was breathtakingly fast. Within a week, the federal authorities aggressively took over the criminal case against Marissa Vance. Facing 20 years in federal prison, she immediately rolled on Weston to get a plea deal. She handed over every single text message, every encrypted email, and every hidden bank record, proving beyond a shadow of a doubt that he knowingly helped her hide and funded her evasion with my brother's stolen trust money. Within a month, Weston was formally indicted by a grand jury on 4 felony counts of wire fraud, grand theft from a vulnerable adult, and accessory after the fact. His prestigious logistics firm didn't just fire him, they publicly, brutally distanced themselves, issuing a massive press statement condemning his horrific actions. He lost his 6-figure salary, his unvested stock options, his pension, and his entire professional reputation. He was blacklisted from the industry. Within 2 months, the total social execution of his mother, Eleanor, was complete. The high society circles of Richmond are incredibly vicious, functioning like a pack of wolves sensing blood. Once the story hit the front page of the local papers, specifically the sickening detail about a wealthy man stealing from a severely disabled, nonverbal man, Eleanor became a total pariah. Her prestigious charity boards formally asked her to step down. Her wealthy country club friends completely stopped returning her frantic phone calls. Unable to show her face in public, she was forced to put her massive, beloved estate on the market at a loss and move to a small, anonymous condo in a completely different state, just to escape the relentless whispers. Weston tried to contact me one final time from the county jail, right before his transfer to state prison. A collect call from an inmate. I sat at my kitchen island, looked at the caller ID, and pressed accept just to hear the complete, utter defeat in his voice. "Sutton," he sobbed into the heavy plastic receiver. The background noise of the jail buzzed behind him. He was actually genuinely crying, his breath hitching. "I lost everything. I have nothing left. They're going to give me 5 years, Sutton. 5 years in a cell, please. I'm so sorry. I love you." "I appraise things for a living, Weston," I said, my voice completely devoid of emotion, staring out the kitchen window at the muddy waters of the James River flowing in the distance. "I walked into your life. I looked behind the beautiful painting, and I found the rot. You are structurally unsound. Don't ever call this number again. I hung up the phone. I blocked the number. It has been exactly 1 year since that day in the courthouse. I kept the beautiful house. I immediately sold Weston's beloved Volvo, sold all the expensive, pretentious furniture he had picked out, and used the money to hire a private contractor. We widened every single doorway in the house. We built a beautiful, smoothly graded wooden ramp up the front steps to the porch. We completely retrofitted the master bathroom, ripping out the glass shower where I found the hair clip and installing a massive, accessible roll-in shower. I brought Leo home. He doesn't live in the sterile, lavender-scented facility anymore. I hired a private, highly trained live-in nurse to help me care for him during the day while I work, entirely funded by the massive, punitive financial settlement I legally extracted from Weston's remaining liquidated assets. It was a quiet Sunday morning in late October. The air was crisp, smelling of wood smoke and dry leaves. I was sitting on the front porch, the exact same brick porch where Weston had locked me out in the sleet to freeze to death. I was wearing a thick, heavy wool sweater that smelled of cedar, holding a ceramic mug of hot, bitter black coffee, feeling the warmth seep into my palms. Leo was sitting in his massive wheelchair next to me, wrapped securely in a thick, warm fleece blanket. He was looking out at the yard, watching the crimson and burnt orange autumn leaves falling slowly from the giant oak tree, scraping softly across the concrete driveway. He couldn't speak a single word, but he slowly turned his head, looked directly at me with his dark brown eyes, and gave me a slow, crooked, incredibly beautiful smile. It took immense physical effort for him to do it, but the pure warmth radiating from his face was unmistakable. I smiled back, feeling a deep, profound sense of absolute peace. I reached over and gently squeezed his twisted hand. My grandfather was right all those years ago on that hot summer day. A snake only bites when it arrogantly thinks you aren't looking at its teeth. But when you finally look, when you refuse to stare at your own shoes, when you clinically document the rot beneath the floorboards, when you patiently collect the hard evidence in the dark, and when you wait in absolute silence for the perfect, inescapable moment to strike, you don't just survive the bite, you cut off the head.